Mi'kmaq created hockey.
I found out later that I am a direct descendant of Old Joe Cope.
There was a time when Mi'kmaq children were torn from their families and not allowed to speak their language, losing their words and stories. But the stories are coming back to us. Stepping on the ice, I take pride knowing the roots of the game of hockey stem from my ancestors in the Mi'kmaq Nation.
You're watching Rogers TV. This is Rogers TV. The following program was provided by a valued member of our local community. Rogers TV is proud to support local producers and share local voices, ideas, and opinions. For more information, please visit our website. The opinions expressed in the following programs are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of Rogers Cable or Rogers TV.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another week at the NB Poli Pod. My name is Joanna Killen, and I'm here on the unceded territory of the Wolastoqey, Pescataway, and Mi'kmaq peoples in Mennequist, also known as St. John on the beautiful River Wolastoq. I'm here with my co-host, Brent Harris.
What's up? You can barely see me. I got my camouflage on. It's hunting season, so it's mandatory to try to blend in.
Yes. And as the mayor lovingly called Miss Muffet, she is downstairs with you. So we may need to take a short break to grab her.
I got the old, if you guys see a bunch of squawks, it's just Beatrix crying out for help as we, it's like we joke about these infants. It's just like everything is a tragic move. It's like you leave the room, you might as well be leaving with your passport. You're never coming back. Mm-hmm. It's tragic.
Mom's gone forever.
Yeah.
She's in a different room. Yes. So this week we're going to be doing a little bit more election post-amble and talking a little bit about the fallout from the U.S. election. What does that mean for New Brunswick?
We didn't get to a couple things last week either. So we still have some of that fallout. I mean, last week, I should say, not last week, week before. We took a break last week. Just too much stuff going on. And we've been going at this every week like clockwork for a long time. So you know what? We'll take a week off if we want, people. But we thank you for your continued support.
Yes, very, very gracious and grateful for everybody who's coming in and all of our patrons who continue to support us. It really helps take the financial burden off of our plate to make this possible. And, it's a labor of love. This podcast,
subscription services, podcast promotion, all of that. It's all helpful for those of you on our Patreon. You can get a hold of us at nbpolypod@gmail.com to find out more, or you can just go to patreon.com/nbpolypod. So that will be that for anybody. If you're looking to get out, we do have a couple of emails, or at least one email that we're going to pull out of the mailbag this week that we got on our Gmail. So that's great. But I thought we could start. Everybody's here to probably listen to the election stuff. So U.S. election obviously gets more attention than Canadian stuff. Ironically enough, it's a big deal. What just happened south of the border? We've been hearing, multiple takes so far. We've been hearing, apocalyptic level concerns from folks and commentators. We've heard a whole range of stuff. So I'd like to know sort of what your thoughts are so far at what we see coming out of the States with the Trump re-election and a trifecta of power between the Senate, the executive branch. Actually, it's really four We have the Senate, we have the Congress, we have the executive branch of the presidency, and Supreme Court has a majority of judges on it.
Yes, it's a very scary thing, but oh, there she is. First things first, though, polls were not correct. They were not, they're predicting this very tight neck and neck situation between Harris and Trump. And that was not the case. I mean, it's another one where what are we looking at? How are we taking the temperature? I don't know if there needs to be a meeting of the pollsters to see how this can be improved. But yeah, once again.
Well, I will push back a little bit. So I thought the same thing. I thought the same thing as you, right? I mean, we saw 3 podcasts. Anybody who's like, polls sucked, everything was off, everything's dead. 3 podcasts for you to listen to where you'll get some good nuance about, by the way, for all those on YouTube, sorry to interrupt. Here's Baby B. Yes, you can see her. She's just hanging out with me. She's right by the mic. So
cute.
If you're not listening on audio, I apologize if you hear a squawk. But she looks calm. She just wanted to hang out and see what's going on. Oh, yeah.
Heard us.
So yeah, the 3 podcasts were 538 podcast, the one that just came out this week, this November the 13th, I think, is that podcast. That is a good sort of high level. They've got a fair bit of data in. We've got, all of the races fairly much, for the most part, settled. Hard to believe that there's still a couple of Congress seats that are not called yet by Associated Press and things like that, just because there's still mail-in ballots to count and they're slow at the local level in some cases. But that one, it really laid it out for me. I think the Curse of Politics, Corey Tonight really put out a hit on Main Street Research, who has been a problematic pollster here, that everybody was using that poll leading into it, basically accusing polls like Main Street, not saying it was Main Street, but accusing them of these, what do they call them? Oh my gosh, I'm forgetting the abbreviation. It's a form of polling that's a bit more new, I guess. And he basically accused them of putting their thumb on the race on various races to get people to, stampede toward liberals. So Ecos Data put one out. That was a poll that basically had 23 people polled in a couple of areas out west, showing that the liberals are ahead of the conservatives. They actually published that poll, and it was incredibly problematic. And that's Frank Graves, and people are still like, what the heck was this guy thinking? You've got Main Street, obviously had its poll in New Brunswick. That was the main one there. But I would say between 538, between Curse of Politics, and between, what was the other one? I think the Daily had a good one too. Okay. And what, there's a lot of headlines that are saying, no one saw this coming. And the pollsters are saying, look, mathematically, it's impossible to predict a result. We told you it was going to be close. The margin of error, we told you was going to be what it was. We didn't predict any, no races could be predicted 20 times out of 20. That's just not how, polling works mathematically. We could have done a better job. Yeah, there's some rogue polls like the Iowa poll from a very credible Iowa pollster who always gets it right. She predicted it for Kamala, and everybody sort of pulled that out saying, hey, look, this is the proof that there is a big stampede toward Kamala, which did not happen. So
what about the buddy who always who's predicted the last?
I know he was wrong.
Elections.
He was wrong. The keys to the White House, that gentleman. Now it's worth noting that his model is only 30 years old. It's been right all except for Al Gore, which his point is you couldn't predict the jettisoning of thousands of black votes. That's his defense of getting Al Gore wrong. If you remember, the Al Gore George Bush came down to Florida, and there were people claiming there were boxes of ballots floating down the river. There were
Hanging chads galore.
There was all kinds of stuff. So he did get that one wrong, but he's gotten every other one right. And he predicted that out of the 13 keys to the White House, that Kamala had 7 of them. So, just a close majority there for her. But he got it wrong. And that's, one of the first times in history that he's got it wrong. And, but yeah, the polls, I don't think are one of the things that I did hear, though, is that everybody does agree the polls have done a very bad job at being able to calculate exactly how popular Trump is, right? The mainstream media ran with these sort of slight leans that these polling firms were giving Kamala and turning it into, look, everything's changed, Kamala's going to win. And now you're seeing New York Times put out a post saying, pollsters blindsided by result because Trump won all 7 battleground states. Yep. But the thing is, they rightfully predicted that Trump could win those battleground states 9 times out of 20, in their modeling. So, you talk about, in some cases it was 7, it was less, I guess. But, listening to them talk about it, I think what we do is we put a lot of weight on polls. And I think the mainstream parties lean on polls. They're important, but it's hard. It's hard as a commentator to know what to do with them, because if we emphasize a poll or we emphasize the result, like people remember, I was one of the very few saying the polls were lying about the Conservatives' popularity in New Brunswick. Yeah, and they were absolutely wrong. Why did I think they were wrong? Because I used historical precedents to kind of put penalties on the Conservatives, which I don't think is overly academic. It's informed by political science, but it's not an academic practice to say, hey, third-term government with an unpopular premier gets a penalty of -7 points on the polling history, right? Like that's not a...
And just the nature of incumbency governments now. And it's funny, we're watching like John Oliver and Jon Stewart and the comedian political commentators, who I think are so brilliant and so like they should, like, just because they're funny doesn't mean they're not absolutely spot on most of the time.
That's right.
And they were saying similar things around just how incumbency governments are just not it. Like you're not winning anybody over if you've been here during these hard times. They were saying that exact thing. And just that the left has gone to center, like that's kind of been their estimation. And I feel like we witnessed this with the Liberals here, where they were picking up former conservative candidates, really leaning more towards centrist values than leaning further left into the more social space of, more left parties. So it's like you witnessed Kamala Harris do that and fail, honestly. Like did not work for her. Yeah. Picking up Liz Cheney and things like that, where you're like, a lot of folks who were Democrats were very much horrified by the Cheney's activity. And we just watched an Iraq War documentary the other day. Like there was some significant horror inflicted on Americans who were involved in that conflict. So, it's wild to me that the Democrats or the Liberals are accepting a lot of the former things that they were vehemently against in past years, because in their mind, they feel they're going to pick up a lot of votes. It worked here in New Brunswick. That's an interesting story for us to dive into and analyze and tell, but it really did not work in the US. I saw a lot more abject opposition to Kamala Harris in the spaces I occupy on the internet that talk about US politics. That's for sure.
Like, I know, but this is where I guess I get lost. Like, there's just I think it's worth, okay, what are the takes? Well, there's the take, like you said, that the Democrats veered too much to woke culture. I think Jon Stewart debunked that so categorically, as well as John Oliver. Like, they both were like, what the heck are you talking about? Which, how many trans people were speaking at the DNC convention? None. How many ads were just about shutting down the border and trying to, rein in grocery store prices and, recruiting leftover conservatives. Like all the big deal announcements were like, the Republicans for Kamala in these some of these swing states. Like there was a big concerted effort to show that Kamala was bipartisan and wasn't too left. Like actually they betrayed a lot of left values. And Bernie Sanders certainly says, look, you guys sucked at trying to get close to where the electorate are and the working class people. It's no surprise they abandoned you because you abandoned them. But now I hear a lot of really like, I don't know, the commentators like and Nancy Pelosi did an interview I heard, and they're like, listen, Kamala did better than Bernie did in his own riding. So Bernie's not right. The working class did not abandon, or the Democrats never abandoned the working class. But you can't argue with the fact that the working class did abandon the Democratic Party.
Yes.
And I think the thing is, it's such a trope. It's such a red herring to say, well, Kamala outperformed Bernie by 2 points in his own riding, in his own district. It's like, who cares? Like Bernie's point transcends
Vermont,
his own position. He's been there for 20 years. Of course, there's going to be some like loss of support for Bernie being there for that long. And I think this is what we see happening is there's a real battle for the consciousness of the situation for these progressive parties. And then you look at, I heard it said best that, Republicans talk about when it's going to rain, and Democrats talk about which umbrella to use, right? So they felt like Republicans are talking about the weather. Here's what's coming. We're going to do something about it. We're going to get undercover, or we're going to do this to change the weather, right? Like that's the kind of idea of the Republicans. Versus the Democrats are like, oh, are we going to use the woke agenda? Are we going to talk about trans people as an umbrella, and that's going to show our progressive chops? Are we going to talk about the border? And like their point, I think, is well made. That like in progressive parties like the Democrats, if you want to call them progressive, or the liberals in New Brunswick, or the liberals in the federal government, they do often have, especially the NDP federally, the NDP are really having a hard time with this. They just don't have a collective, unified voice on what to do. It's just a bunch of special interest groups fighting over who's right.
Yeah. I totally agree. And, I think the reason we can look at the U.S. is because of their two-party system. We are stuck with something very similar here provincially. And both of us were looking up, like, when did Australia get proportional representation? Like, when did New Zealand? And it was over 100 years ago. So like I don't know if we will ever see that in our lifetime, because it had to happen when there was a groundswell of workers and unions and different parties who are strong all coming together to basically overthrow the system and create something new for Australia, for instance, in like 1918, and it dated back into the 1800s.
It does seem to be that when a third party breaks in and forms like an official, it seems to take a few things. One, to move from that two-party system and to proportional systems, it takes multiple parties making a break into government and being forced to collaborate. So we had somewhat of this with the NDP, but of course, the NDP didn't make proportional representation their shtick. They made healthcare issues, dental care, pharmacare. They made this stuff their shtick, which you can argue the validity of that. But I think it has been a once in a century opportunity, probably, for the NDP and the Liberals to come together, be forced to collaborate because the electorate refused to give a majority status, and push that through. That's what happened in Australia. I remember reading about that, and New Zealand, it seems, right? Even the UK, right? They were a two-party dominated system with first past the post. That's where all this was birthed out of. But they moved out of that style in many regards. Even in the States, some states do ranked ballots.
Yeah, that's right. And so I until there is a significant enough opposition, and the NDP probably could have added this to their agenda, but we're not going to get the oppressing or over, the big parties to agree to this, because then that means giving up power, which they're not going to be willing to do. And I think we have a mailbag that relates to this, actually,
Yep.
and somebody who tried to get this sort of past the post, if you will, within the Liberals biennial, because they had a policy group meeting that we've referred to on here a few times, where they tried to get this on the agenda for the party, and were not successful, I don't believe.
Yes, Vivian Unger messaged us. Thank you, Vivian, for your email. And Vivian was just saying, hey, loved your podcast debrief. Always enjoy it, especially the election-related episodes. Source of good discussion overall. Sean did a great job predicting the result. Absolutely. As we know, Sean Rouse did do a great job at predicting the result. The only one to see the Liberal landslide month and a half before it actually occurred. So that's a big deal. But she says, she was the one. She works for Fair Vote Canada. She's been working on it since 2012, electoral reform, as a volunteer. And she's the one who put the NBLA motion together for a citizens' assembly on electoral reform.
Right.
So we're going to have Vivian on the pod. Vivian, if you're listening, we are going to reach out. We are going to get you on here to have that discussion. We did just have Amanda from New Majority during the election. That was a good interview about sort of the state of democracy and a new group trying to get new people to get to the polls and engage with the democracy. But that's well received, and I think it's going to be a timely discussion. I just think we would go so far right now in democracy, like it was the number one thing on the ballot for people in the States, right? The state of democracy. And I think rightfully so. You've got a president now who has basically been given, a blank check to criminalize as much of the democratic institution as he wants. He's even joked about running for a third term. It's not like democracies shouldn't change over time. It's not like they should just be stuck in some sort of it wasn't until Teddy Roosevelt won 4 consecutive terms as president that they put up. They were like, okay, unfair advantage, Teddy. We know we know you did amazing. We know you're not allowed to be the king of the country. So, too bad.
We already did that.
This is your last. So, right. So they literally at Teddy Roosevelt's 4th term is when they passed the rule that you can't have more than 2 terms in government. I love term limits. I hate seeing 25-year-old veteran politicians. I hate seeing 10-year-old politicians. I hate it.
I know.
It's just gross. Get them out of here. They're weird. They talk funny. They're too filtered. They're too unapproachable. And somehow they figured out whatever formula there is for getting a bunch of people who don't pay attention to politics to keep voting for them. And I don't want that because it's not qualitative. But
it gets people to pay attention when you have to mix up those people who are involved and provides that fresh set of eyeballs. It doesn't matter what age you are. It just is that you are, you're new to the system, and thus can potentially alter it to fit the evolving state of humanity. that is all.
Yes. Yeah. And I think you're right. If we were to put in proportional representation, and don't put it up to a citizens' assembly, honestly, and don't put it for a referendum. It's too confusing. There's too many interests in it. BC has always voted to support proportional representation, but they didn't get the threshold vote for the referendum. The referendum, I think, was 55 or 60%. Yeah. And I think they ended up getting 41 and 49. Here's what I would love to see. Let's have a referendum on first past the post and see how it does. The polls tell me
we love it. Do we hate it?
Right. The polls tell me. But when you put it over to the citizens to say, what type of proportional style representation do you want, or mixed member plurality, or ranked ballots, or whatever there's tons of different versions of this stuff. It's when you put that to people, they get really I don't know, maybe we should leave it alone. This seems really confusing. So exactly, right. Let's get some folks in a room who can look at the geographic realities of Canada, and they can look at the regional realities, and they can put together a form that's going to work for us. At the very least, ranked ballots do make sense.
Yes. To start. Well, okay, let's go over to our friend Jerry Awanas. he has provided us with some post-election commentary, and we're going to have him on the show because he's about to go on a book tour with his Taxing New Brunswick novel that he has just written for all of us, and I think all of the legislature hopefully to read.
Yes.
And I just had this conversation this morning with the constituent about taxation in New Brunswick, because it's talking a lot about how the system was built for industry in many, many ways, and not for the resident of the province or the country for that matter. So Jerry says here, just in the process of listening to your post-election wrap-up, and I thought I'd regale you with a few comments and observations based both on my experience in having worked and managed a number of campaigns and elections, and my much more limited background of having lived through a couple of elections in NB. Number one, I am as thrilled as you all are that Higgs was defeated, both his government and him personally. I couldn't find the thought of some of the candidates being elected more distasteful, and I'm glad New Brunswickers saw through a lot of their choices. At least Higgs had the decency to face the cameras and congratulate Holt in a decent way. Number two, I'm so glad my fellow New Brunswickers showed Higgs and Steve Outhouse in no uncertain terms that this type of campaign that might work in Alberta and Saskatchewan is not the type of campaign that works here. I'm proud to say this hard right approach doesn't work in my adopted province. Number three, in an election where change is afoot, third parties are the ones who lose out the most, which is why the Greens didn't do as well as expected. Now, in no way did I think the Liberals would do as well as they did. I'm guilty of having been swayed by the polling numbers that were tighter than the final tally, but the Greens definitely got caught in the crossfire. If most people really wanted Higgs gone, they weren't going to chance that by voting for a party that was never going to accomplish the specific thing, as you pointed out in your own case, Sean, like getting Higgs government out. That having been said, I still voted for Kevin Arsenault because I have a personal connection with him, but Pat Finnegan will serve us well too. I think that your pre-election speculations, which I thoroughly enjoyed hearing, and even in today's episode, you give far too much weight to people voting for candidates because of their personal qualities. That part stuck with me personally. You guys.
Oh yeah, that one hurt.
I know but it's so true. You guys and I might vote that way, but in my experience tells me that most people do not. They'll look at a party and a leader well before they ever look at what an individual has accomplished. I think this being especially so when there is no incumbent. Most people don't want to work that hard in terms of analyzing each candidate's specific qualities. They've got other things to do. Number six, in spite of what I just said, I have to do and I told you so regarding Michelle Conroy. I know that some advised you otherwise, but they were Liberals. So they have a particular view of things. Oops. There is no secret as to why Conroy won, despite being challenged by a very credible candidate. Conroy is involved in community events, situations at such a granular level that I can say I have never seen anything like it. She'll organize a 50-50 on Facebook for someone who is sick or unsure there are enough people to move furniture for a particular family. She also gives a about things like homelessness, which is not usually high in Conservatives' agenda. I've never attended an event in Miramichi, particularly having to do with Ukrainian newcomers, where I did not meet her. People remember these things on election day, regardless of which way the provincial winds are blowing. Finally, here, number 7, I can guarantee you that absolutely no one votes on the basis of how good a legislator, a particular candidate is, unless there's a specific soundbite from the legislature that buries a candidate. No one knows how good he or she is, and no one cares. Trust me. Anyway, I thought you appreciate the insights. Looking forward to more episodes. So those hard truths from Jerry Awanis, everyone.
It's just so devastating because it's like, okay, you know, 100% you're right. But that is like just the worst state of like, that's just so cynical to be in a place where it's like, hey, it doesn't matter how much you know, how capable you are, how intentional you are, or like how experienced you are.
How much experience?
And it, you know, it doesn't even matter if you're a good communicator necessarily. Like, just one second, I'm going to pause and be right back. Had a really full diaper had to deal with. This is going to be the new reality of the podcast.
It is.
And this leads me to my biggest point. How is somebody our age supposed to get to the TV bingo, get to the bingo hall, get to the church hall, get to the fundraiser, get to the events in the community, be articulate and coherent about what's going on in politics, Find out how to, reach the person down the road who's 86 years old. Blah, 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 blah. If this is the game, Jerry, this is all I'm going to say back. And I think you're absolutely right. And I think you're 100% right. And it destroys my hope for the future, because there's no way we're going to get people who are close to the issue, capable and passionate, and urgently willing to mix things up in government like a Donald Trump just did in the States. We're not going to find it here, because the bar is like, we don't have anybody helping people. Like, okay, look at us down here in St. John. And this is not crying foul. Like, we had our team so pillaged by the Liberals, and I'm not going to go into details on that because I don't want to railroad anybody on our podcast, but we were absolutely pillaged by the Liberals. And Jerry's right. We got caught, the Greens got caught in the crossfire. We were the most capable of a breakthrough position for the Greens down here in St. John. And yes, we're Green members. It's not a surprise or secret. We've run for them. You've run for them. You were running. But it leaves us in this place where it's like, people are they were so just looking, just for that little simple change. Now, what's going to change? Jerry, you put it out best. Service New Brunswick Minister Aaron Kennedy, local government, new minister in that file, already walking back a promise around comprehensive property reform or tax reform.
Right.
Like, we need industry. Like, are we seriously going to continue to allow Irving Oil to pay less taxes than the regional hospital at the country's largest refinery? Are we seriously going to continue to allow mills in this province to pay less than mills in British Columbia or anywhere else in the country in many cases? Are we seriously going to allow the current status of this being a billionaire's playground with 4 billionaires in this province, actually 5 if you count Gifford, if you count the Cooks, who I think you should count, even though JDI is a 50%, 49 or 51. I don't know where they are at the shareholder level or the ownership stake level in Cook Aquaculture, but it's now the largest, privately owned fish company in the world. They've been acquiring businesses all over the world. It's a multinational corporation now, born in my hometown of Charlotte County. This is a billionaire's playground. We don't think that maybe we should just try to match Quebec or match Ontario's regulatory system on these fronts. Like, we're so prone for private equity takeover in this province.
Yeah.
And who's talking about it? It wasn't the Liberals. It wasn't the Conservatives. It was the Green Party in many cases. And it was certain candidates like yourself. And it's just so stark. It's like, you guys don't realize what they just did to the party that refused to be willing and courageous enough to put deep change in place. They just voted for a Donald Trump, and they're going to do something here. It's just,
some would argue, though, that the Democrats, weren't putting enough in place to combat big industry, right? And neither were our comparative Liberals for transformational change that will pay for those things that we are seeing on the streets of people, being homeless and needing transitional housing. We went back and figured out that, the deregulatory environment of Brian Mulrooney's age is where sort of this all began federally, and with Frank McKenna here in New Brunswick. They stopped paying for public housing. They put all of our public housing into private equity hands, and here we are.
Yeah. Another good podcast for anybody to listen to. Go listen to Cost of Living. They just, CBC podcast, they just did a great coverage. Like, this is not pulling on my, I'm not like, people have accused me of just being, inflammatory or being, what's the word when you're fear mongering? That's it. And it's like, I'm not actually, you guys. Like, I'm going to put out an op-ed on housing, and in it, you're going to see one of the things I talk about is that the nominal profit margin on real estate and leasing as an industry in Canada is 37%. It was 20% in 2004, and the average profit margin across all industries in this country is more like 12%. So, hey, green flags to all the private equity firms you could imagine to buy up property and make more money on them, because how many property management companies do people remember when they were kids? Like, none. How many are there now? Dozens. Why? Because we're squeezing that industry. It's so deregulated. There's no no way that we can stop people skimming tons of profit off it and putting us into homelessness to do so. And I'm sorry, but when you allow that to go unchallenged and unquestioned as the liberals, you're condemning the population to a future where they have to choose fascism or they have to choose a Kamala Harris. And Kamala, just like, to be fair, like, is just a nice looking lawyer in a pantsuit who speaks well. Nobody believed that she was going to get grocery prices under control. Nobody believed that she was going to challenge the big interests, but everybody believed that Trump was going to challenge the interests. Everybody believed that Trump was willing to break. And so it wasn't crazy people. It wasn't just conspiracy theorists. It was, yeah, sure, the KKK all voted for Donald Trump. And people who voted for Donald Trump are going to have to reconcile with the fact for the rest of their life that they voted for the same president as the KKK did unanimously. That's just okay. But that's where we're heading. When progressive parties and liberals specifically and NDP don't get together in a way to put the right people in front of people to say, these are the folks we want leading the charge of change. And we don't care if they're not the polished politician that we're used to. We don't care if they didn't pay their party dues. We don't care what their background is. We care that they've been involved, they're invested, they're articulate, they can communicate, and they are close to the problem. Like, that's really where we're at. And it's like, back to Jerry's point, because I know I've been ranting a long time. It's like, my God, I just, we're no different. We're going to end up in a position where we're voting for
Pierre Polyev, because that is that's where we're headed. And people who are so mad on Facebook. There were so many people, I could probably count like 5 people that were excited about Trump that won here in Canada. Most of them were like, oh my goodness, blah, blah, blah. But guess who we're going to end up with? We will end up with Pierre Polyev, who will get along great with Trump and who has no record of voting for the people. He was, he's got one motion passed in 20 years. He was the housing minister under Harper, did nothing, continued this perpetuation of, getting wealth into the hands of the great wealth transfer, they call it, getting everyone to move their money into the hands of the very few Canadians that are running some of these bigger industries, including our grocery industry, by the way. But is trying to make himself as like a man of the people, right? When he very much is not. But we're going to end up with him because of this distaste for Trudeau and this whole rejection of incumbents, right? Like, that's where we're headed. Oh no, I agree.
It's like, God, I'm sorry, Jerry, like, we're never going to be able to be like Michelle Conroy. We're too young. We're too busy. We're doing a freaking podcast down here with a child hanging off us. And I'm not trying to cry poor. Like, we care about this. We're deeply passionate. I get ridiculed all the time on Reddit for not being, more one way or too much another way, or being embroiled in whatever drama people want to dig up. We don't have people knocking on our door to support us. We have supporters. Obviously we've gotten elected, but there's not like this big come to Jesus in Canada that I'm seeing happening. And I don't think Polyev is anything like Donald Trump. I think you're right. He will get along better with Donald Trump in some ways. Maybe not, though. Like, Trudeau's a little more Pollyanna than Trump than Polyev might be. I think Polyev has a little bit of an ego to his brand now that he's invented. He's invented this brand as being a firebrand, as being somebody who's not afraid to say, crazy things to people, or call people out, or call names, or, be crass and all that. Like, he's built an entire brand around that. I mean, Trump did too. That's what people are looking for. They're not looking for a politician that sounds nice, looks nice, and seems like a nice person. But they were in New Brunswick. Like, this is the thing, is like, we still voted that way in New Brunswick, if you ask me. And I don't know, man. Like, we are heading into a problematic position. I know we're kind of mixing the US election results for forecasting. I'm on the more doom side of things. I mean, people talk about tariffs, and Trump is already indicating that they're going to be serious about tariffs. we already have pretty substantial problems in New Brunswick because we've let a billionaire, run the hen house around forestry, and we now are being sued by the U.S. government, and they have tariffs on our softwood lumber because we basically wouldn't compete properly. We said to the Irvings, like, here, have our crown land for nothing. Take all the wood off it you want and refine it into products and sell it at top dollar. Like, that's an unfair market advantage, right? That the states took issue with and took us to court over. You can argue about the finer points of that all we want. I don't know who's right on that. I just know that it's an issue that we have. It's largely an issue we have in New Brunswick, and we don't seem to be electing people who are learning that lesson and who are willing to kind of stop us from marching toward the cliff. So far, there's nothing but question marks for the Holt government. I mean, I think Aaron Kennedy is the one who's going to have to drive home the point about tax reform, and as the cabinet minister in charge of that file, and Jerry, you're doing a lot of good work with this book, and and I think one of the quotes, what was that quote that we had by him, if you can find that, Joe? There was a great quote that somebody put together, and you're on mute.
Yes, we had somebody make it in, like, from a Goodreads into a quote. I'm going to find it for you real quick here.
Yeah, no worries. But Jerry, I think you're pushing on the real estate side of it, on the property side of it, and then I want to talk about Pete Buttigieg.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yes. Hold on, everybody. So just before we go to Pete, I want to finish out this Jerry piece and then reference an Acadie Nouvelle article that was good. So Jerry's quote here is, tax rates should be set on budgetary needs, not the other way around. Your tax bill should not increase just because your assessment has.
I agree with this. We've talked about it before.
Yeah.
We have no clue what's needed for the budget of the city of St. John. And it drives me crazy because I can't get visibility on it. I don't know if we're $20 million a year short on capital, $80 million a year on short. I just know we have a huge deficit. And okay, you can say, well, Brent, you need a plan to go pay for all that. It's like, yeah, but we've not had an administration, any municipality that I know of in New Brunswick anyway, that comes out with, hey, what we need to operate an A-level city is this, but what we're getting is this. So I'm sorry, everybody, we're going to have to live with a C+ level city because we're underfunded to the tune of X number of dollars. That's what he's saying. He's saying, look, if you know what you need as a city, then your property tax assessments don't change your tax bill. And that's right, because then you'd have this floating tax rate that says, well, the city needs $190 million a year, and we've decided to have the mixture of taxation and revenue come in this way. So we're choosing who to target, and we've chosen who we want to support through expenditures and all this stuff. And there's the $191 million price tag to that budget. So therefore, taxes went up, everybody. Sorry about your luck. This is what the city needs to survive. Or we'll just go into deficits every year, right? And it's
cities aren't allowed to do. Legislatively, we are not permitted to do. So with these, with flipping the script on the budget piece here, you say, okay, we need $200 million just to make a flat number. Industry effects, these ones. So we're going to tax them a little bit higher on the road budget. We're going to lower that piece for the residents. But the garbage piece is this much. So that's going to be this part of the budget. So you can see how the puzzle pieces actually go together a lot better. If we do it that way. So ultimately, we love Jerry and we appreciate his thoughtful consideration of all of these tax pieces, because right now it is it's a mystery box that our assessments and our tax, rates go into essentially. And we are responsible for setting the tax rate for St. Johners. And it's a significant responsibility that I take very seriously, because the average person can't afford more bills, as we were just speaking of. So I want to shift over to this article by Alain Deneau from the Acadie Nouvelle, and it's titled "A Legislative Assembly Without Kevin Arsenault." So it's quite extensive, and I would encourage anyone to go take a look at it because it really is a great review of his work and who he is as a person. And even in here, it says that Susan Holt quite rightly made the observation in a discussion that Kevin Arsenault was more than just a member of the Greens, a party one can believe in. With his integrity, critical sensibility, and sharp mind, he gave a new dimension to the role of MLA, sometimes giving the impression that he alone was the political opposition in this part of the country, a light in a desert of ideas. So Kevin's reality is much like ours. 3 kids, one on the way, 2 kids, one on the way. Runs a farm co-op, very much a community organizer type of person. He is, I think, the same age as you, 35, 36, something around there.
No, he's a couple years older than me.
Okay, it might be between us. I'm 40 or 35. So, but small children. And to me, that is just a shining example of, excellence, right? But that, to Jerry's point, doesn't really matter. So in this article,
won't win.
No, it says here, the parliamentary habitus, a sociological term for the moral and behavioral rules of different social milieus, like people, is that of mediocrity. But we must use the word with precision. Contrary to popular usage, mediocrity does not imply bad, stupid, or poor. It should not be confused with inferiority. Rather, mediocrity and its corresponding social structure, mediocrity, describes the rule of the average and the average person. These are the people whom politics attracts. They have an average amount of culture, average ambition, will perform at an average rate throughout their term of office to convince the greater number of people that they will have no more collective means available to us than what these mediocre individuals are willing to grant us. They will persuade us that we are worth no more than some happy medium. The Conservatives were desperate to find the middle ground. Even the Greens proved somewhat drawn to it. The political bar is low. So with regards to Kevin, with his eloquence, audacity, and humor, also his ethical conviction and intellectual grasp of the issues, Kevin Arsenault is one of the rare politicians who inspired us to believe that progress is possible in a desirable direction. The world is in a bad state due to frightening social inequities or the ongoing ecological crisis. The politics of the extreme center are not up to the task of dealing with the issues of today. The time has come to build a political resistance outside of this sterile forum. So basically, just, for folks, that's a lot of words. It's a professor writing this. Kevin's excellence was not suited for the political mediocrity of New Brunswick.
Definitely not.
And I'd say there's a lot of people whose excellence was not suited for the political mediocrity of New Brunswick.
No, people did. I think it scares people when you see outspoken, articulate, capable politicians who just like. I think about how many candidate forums were there in this election all across the province? Guess where there wasn't one? Yours. I mean, I dare someone to prove me wrong that you wouldn't have chewed up Kate and Kim Costain in an open debate about issues. Like, I think you would have chewed them up and spit them out. I don't think it's a mistake that they were, quote, too busy for a candidates forum and a debate. Not that I think that a debate would have changed the election result, because I think debates almost never do. They can galvanize.
And that's very kind of you. But I do think that that's just not what anybody is looking for. Like, no one's looking for me or anybody to be smarter than the other on these issues. It's just the state of affairs in politics, and I think it's worthy of recognition, 100%.
But it's not in the States anymore. They did not vote for mediocrity in the States. They voted for an extreme response. They voted for somebody who didn't give a about what was sitting in front of him. Buddy was taking a baseball bat to it in 5 different ways and told you about it, essentially showing you the knife he's going to stab you with the whole way to the polls. And everybody was like, yeah, that guy. That's the guy. And not just that guy, his buddies. make sure they get the Senate, make sure, like, I'm sorry, but like, Brunswick is behind everywhere else. Of course, we got our Sunny Ways premier now, everybody. Next election, we're going to see some collision of worlds. We're going to see some disparate forces. And I don't know, man, like, I don't know who to organize with in this province anymore on some of this stuff. Like, I can try to be a neutral commentator on here and give, both sides of the story and, try to give justice to a conservative opinion. I mean, the Conservative Party under Glenn Savoy, doesn't look like it's wanting to, to go in the direction of the more extreme religious sort of brand that they were heading into. They got pretty rapidly punished, but I don't see anybody in that party that's going to want to, storm the beaches of Normandy either, and go after the real problem makers in this province. I don't see that. Glenn Savoy's already raising the yellow flag, as one article from CBC points out, about allowing municipalities. There's been 2 articles written about this quote $24 million battle over industrial taxes in New Brunswick, because the city of St. John hosts these major industrial sites that pay the majority of their tax dollars to the province, right? Because the province collects sales tax, and the province collects, which they collect and pay. I don't know what their balance ever is, but I'm sure they're net contributors. So you look at that, then you look at their property taxes. The province gets over half of that. Municipalities get the rest. So, and we can't control the tax to them, really, not without punishing residents at the same time.
But the continuing narrative is that, industry will not want to come here. There won't be no industrial growth if we keep, if we let the municipality get these taxes, blah, blah, blah. I think all we're doing is satiating the current environment. We're not attracting anything. Yeah, exactly.
No, let's test the theory. We got a lot of competitive advantages. And I'm so sick and tired of other states and other provinces who have just as much industry as us laugh at us and say, you guys are absolutely ridiculous for giving them this deal. They're not going anywhere. You know what? Norway put a marginal tax rate on their oil and gas sector at 87%. Guess what? Norway's home to one of the largest oil producing companies, Shell. Like, they ain't hurting. They did not come. And that was actually when they were discovering oil in the first place. That wasn't even after the industry was already there and set up and established. They were told, and I forget who it was that just did a talk on this. He was addressing some sort of economic forum and said, we were laughed at by every expert you could imagine when we said we were going to put a nominal tax rate of 80+% so that we could diversify the rest of our economy with the royalties off of this industry. And we were told that they would never come, that they don't need to be here, blah, 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 blah. It's the same old song and dance. Taxes will make it impossible to do business. And it's not true. And everybody keeps saying it's true. And then when you see someone like Norway step up and say, prove me wrong, bud, don't come then. Here's your tax rate. If you don't want to pay it, you don't have to come. Well, guess what? They came. And this happens every time, from what I can tell. And especially at a time like this, when you see even the states sort of challenging this neoliberal order where, hey, we don't have any problem with sending a factory to China or Mexico because they're going to be able to take advantage of a cheaper labor force and, cheaper land costs and cheaper tax rates. They're going to move the factory and who cares? Like, that neoliberal order of moving things around for the cheapest possible production and transportation and whatever of goods is dead. It's dead everywhere except in New Brunswick.
Or I'd say North America. I mean, really, we were built as a place for the king to make money from our original purpose is that. And there's some good Substacks out there these days, writers who are not part of the quote mainstream media, who can kind of get these thoughts out a little more easily, talking about how basically our choices between corporate capitalism, i.e. like the neoliberal brand of capitalism, or barbarian capitalism, which is sort of Trump's interpretation of it, which is like, divide and conquer, versus sort of our more polite version of corporate capitalism, which dictates, we have boards and we have processes and we have Six Sigma process improvement, and we're
shareholders.
Yeah, we're very polite about it, but ultimately same effect versus, the private equity, the family business of the Trump family and the Rockefellers and whatnot. So there's a couple main brands, and that's basically those two political parties, and that they agree on a lot of things, but they don't agree on some other things. And that's where you see some of this like divide come in, and why we end up with people being given issues like transgender healthcare and whatnot instead of grocery prices to win elections on, because they want you to focus over here while they're making all kinds of gobs of cash over here. So, these ideas are what get us in trouble, but they're not. They're very common in the academic circles. This stuff's been being talked about for decades, and it's we're just seeing the results of it now.
Yeah. Final thoughts coming up on the hour. Pete Buttigieg. I thought he said something really good recently. He was at a talk and he's like, "Look, I'm not going to give a take. There's enough takes out there." I think what I'll say is that if there's anything we can look to in the next 4 years, it's the local. And this is what I'm going to be looking at. And it's the experiment of this top-down federal response to Trump and the Republican Party to break. How does that actually play out with regard to local politics at the state level? We've seen other countries, like, you have a neo-fascist prime minister in Italy, who is literally part of the carryover party that was, invented in the 40s. You've seen far-right groups in Germany get shut down. That led to a shutdown of the German government under Olaf Scholz, having to sack his finance minister and try to block certain candidates from running for other levels of government from the ADF. So, like, this is happening. We saw Bolsonaro in Brazil. We've seen but how local government is able to evade, embrace, oppose is going to be interesting, because I think that's where you and I are very much at the most local level you can be. We can't make any of the change, even if we had a unanimous votes around council table, which we rarely ever get on the issues that we bring to the table. Even if we were to have that, we couldn't. Constitutionally, we don't exist. Municipalities don't exist constitutionally. We can't evoke change over the province. We need the province to allow us to do the work we believe in, and we believe will improve things. But I thought that was a pretty interesting idea that he had, that the local is going to save us, and the local politics of this country are very different than what you're seeing with Trump.
Hope. Maybe I can see why people opt out, though. This stuff is very exhausting, and I'm glad we at least have our little corner of the local presence here. Thank you, Rogers. Thank you, Spotify and Apple and all the places that host this, because at least we have this little corner where we can share these ideas. We're not being carted off to jail for having these thoughts. So, we do technically still live in a free place that we can express ourselves to this effect. So
just
appreciate everybody. It's just not.
It's free. It's just not thriving.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But thank you, everyone, for sticking around.
Yes. we are it. We'll be back in probably 2 weeks' time if we don't nail down Jerry or Vivian Unger for those interviews. Those are our next orders of business. So we're going to take 2 weeks. We're going to give ourselves a little break from the weekly schedule here.
Yeah.
Unless we can nail one of those interviews down, and then we might keep that week-long schedule going. But I do expect we're going to take a holiday break somewhere close to Christmas and sort of let things settle, pick it up in the new year. So we are heading into that, folks.
We need to see how the fall session goes, right? Like starts on the 19th. So November 19th next week.
For a couple weeks.
Yeah. Be interesting to see what comes out of that.
I just said in one of the recent posts that this is the start of season 4, like 2 episodes ago. So we'll be taking a break early in season 4, but wrapping it up over the next year. So that is it for us this week. Thank you all for standing by and listening. And please keep messaging, tweeting, emailing, all the lovely things.
Thank you, folks.
Connect with us by visiting our website or email us at comments@rogerstv.com. This is Rogers TV. You're watching Rogers TV. Are you a content creator looking to expand your audience and make your voice heard in your community? Rogers TV wants to provide you with a platform to share your hobbies, interests, and stories for free. Visit us to find out more.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Southwest Jubilee. I have a special guest with me here today. I want to introduce you to Dorothy Purdy, who is no stranger to our local music scene and throughout the Maritimes. I understand that you have wrote a book.
I have.
And so just give me a few details about this book.
Well, I've always collected pictures and words of country stars and things like that. Traveled for 30 years, took a lot of them with me, you know. And I would say to people, oh,